From the beaches of Daytona came a dream, a never-ending pursuit of the limits that man and machine can achieve together, before one fails the other. Only few places on Earth have truly tried this boundary more than Daytona. From its humble beach and road course to what we know today as the Daytona International Speedway, the goal has never been different. At the D-shaped oval now, there have been many men that have overstepped the boundary and sadly came to their ultimate demise. This is their stories, what led them to the Speedway, and the events that transpired in their final moments. These are the stories of 40 souls. Born on February 22, 1921, Teague was raised during the dark 1930s that loomed over much of America. Being a Volusia County resident and growing up on the shores of Daytona Beach, he saw the first challenges of man and machine commerce down the sandy aisles. He himself began these runs, and eventually took to the air, as he became a member of the U.S. Air Force. Teague, outside of his service, became good friends with Smokey Yunick, who together would dive into NASCAR with the fabulous Hudson Hornets. They built an illustrious career together, and Teague would win on NASCAR's beach course twice and become a two-time AAA stock car champion. He collected 7 Cup wins as well, and made 2 attempts at the Indianapolis 500. Approaching the end of the 50s, a new superspeedway was built. Teague, being touted as the king of the beach, naturally gravitated to the high banks. On top of the inaugural Daytona 500 being announced by NASCAR, USAC was ready to sanction its own race later in April of 1959. Marshall would partner with Chappie Root and enter a Sumar Special, trimming out the car to be more like in line with the Le Mans sports cars. The target speed around the track was set at 180 miles an hour, and Teague was given the honors to turn some of the first speed record runs. On February 10th, he set a speed in the car of 171.821 miles an hour, still just over 8.5 miles off the target speed. The 11th would be the day they would shoot for the big time. He took the car to the high banks and careened around at record-breaking speeds. But the car would lose traction and would crash violently. Teague would be declared dead on scene, becoming the first life claimed by the Speedway. Someone who was once claimed as the king of the mother track, the beach course, and possibly one of the best stock car drivers of the 1950s. 11 days later, on what would have been Marshall Teague's 38th birthday, the track was host to the inaugural Daytona 500. George Reggie AMC Jr., born October 24, 1924 in Verona, Oregon. Through most of his upbringing, AMC learned about racing through sprint cars and dirt tracks. He finally burst onto the AAA champ car scene in the mid-1950s, finishing 4th in season standings in 1956. He claimed 2 race victories that year, and in 1957 he finished 3rd with another one. He also finished podium in that year's Indianapolis 500. But in 1958, he nearly won the title, being runner-up to the championship and in the Indianapolis 500 as well. 1959 was setting up to be a possible breakout year for George AMC. He started off strong at the season opener in Daytona, nearly breaking Tony Bettenhausen's closed course speed record of 176.9 miles an hour. AMC being 176.818. AMC ran to lap 39. The impact would split the car in two and kill him instantly. The car would continue to cartwheel for several hundred feet before coming to rest. His speed rival and championship rival from the previous season, Tony Bettenhausen, would later withdraw from the exhibition race that was going to be run later during the day. AMC was well respected in the garage, being a World War II veteran, and he was also a quick emerging American oatmeal driver. During 1959, all sorts of events were held at the new track. One of them was boat racing. On the infield, Lake Lloyd, local eye surgeon Dr. Bernie E. Taylor took his powerboat to the lake and participated in events. He was well known for winning many boat races in the area, and became well respected in racing in and outside of what his primary practice was. Taylor at this point was approaching his mid-50s, and was at the track with his wife and 2 children. George, his son, was also participating in events. Dr. Taylor would race in a heat event, battling 2 other competitors. As Taylor roared across the lake, he would lose control and break into a slide. The water would catch and launch Taylor from his boat. Walt Peterson, one of the competitors chasing Taylor, saw him launch from his vessel and attempted all he could to avoid the stranded rival. Sadly, he would hit Taylor, killing him instantly. Peterson later recounted his experience to the Daytona Beach Morning Journal. In it, he stated, "His head just popped up out of the water right in front of us." It isn't exactly clear on who struck Taylor from the competitors, but all of them crashed trying to avoid the incident. Martin Every was just like any young aspiring race car driver. He had aspirations to claim the biggest trophies at the fastest speeds, and at only 23 years old, he was hired to test an AMC Rambler, as the American Motors Company was attempting to again reshape their car brand. Martin zipped around the track on June 18, 1960, but as he pushed the Rambler to its limit, a tire would give. The car spun, then weight shifted, flipping over and destroying the vehicle. What became strange with the incident was that no one reportedly witnessed the crash happen. In fact, it occurred on quarter exit at only 75 miles an hour. The test was also being conducted at 7:45 in the evening, with Every being brought to Halifax Medical Center at 8:40. At that point, he was declared dead on arrival. Martin survived by both his parents and his sister. On June 30th, 1927, a boy named Harold Francis Haberling was born. Habe would be involved in the Second World War at a very young age, and after he got out of the war, he came home, and he began entrenching himself in the Arizona racing scene. He battled in AAA stock cars and super modifieds with the likes of Roger McCluskey, Don Davis, Gene Brown, and Hank Arnold. Eventually, he would come east and run in NASCAR events. And coming into the 1961 season, he was building a name for himself in the modified division. February 21st, 1961, driving a 1955 Chevrolet, Hay went out for practice. Driving through turns 3 and 4, he began to lose control, and he slid down into the apron. The car switched back and ran right up the hill, smashing into the wall head-on. The car then turned over into a series of sidewinders, and it shredded to pieces. Hay would die on scene, leaving behind his wife Betty Jean and his 3 daughters. Being a prominent driver in the Arizona racing scene, he was buried with 2 others who also had built their name with him as well, Jimmy Bryan and Bobby Ball. Billy Drew Wade rose to the top level of stock car racing past the age of 30. It didn't stop him, however, from winning Rookie of the Year in 1963, and he drove that year for car owner Cotton Owens. And in 1964, he won 4 times, including 4th place in points. Just 5 days before 1965 would officially turn over, Billy was offered to conduct a Goodyear tire test. Going out in a Mercury, he darted into turn 1 and blew a tire. The car went straight and slammed into the wall in turn 1. It slid to the apron, then sprung back up the track, slapping the wall again. The first impact was recorded at over 170 miles an hour, which killed Wade instantly. He would leave behind his wife and his 4 daughters. The family had recently moved from his hometown of Houston, Texas to South Carolina, in aspirations of Wade's newfound success. It had been a long journey for him, but his career had just gotten started, but sadly, it came to an abrupt end. Born August 22, 1940 in the town of Dover, Massachusetts, Donald Charles McTavish started his racing career at an early age of 15. Not much racing was done, however, as McTavish started in demolition derby events. He built an immaculate reputation in the Northeast, even getting a segment on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Don soon worked in the NASCAR by the mid-1960s, and through the sportsman division he continued to rise, eventually beating Ralph Earnhardt for the 1966 championship. Through his young career, the one track he had never seemed to race on was Daytona. That was until 1969. Driving a 1966 Mercury Comet, McTavish would make his debut and find himself racing fellow sportsman driver Bob James. They eventually made contact, which caused Don's car to hit the wall. The angle of impact caused a horridly perfect shear situation, taking the entire front end off, straight up to where the cockpit starts. As the car spun back across track, smoke and dirt propelled itself high into the Florida sky, obscuring sight for oncoming competitors. Sam Sommers, attempting to avoid the accident, dodged straight into Donald's path. He smashed straight into the exposed end of what was once a Mercury comet, and sent McTavish into the grass. Donald had no chance. In honor of the young 28-year-old sensation, Albany-Saratoga Speedway held an event titled the Don McTavish Memorial Race, with which Richie Evans won the event, 3 months after McTavish's passing. Both Dorothy and Marcia Tavish, the mother and sister of Don, presented the award to Richie, which provided the prerequisite for what is now known as just the McTavish Award, given to people who contribute considerably to the New England racing scene. Later in 1969, Daytona would host its usual motorcycle races. 30-year-old Wayne Harris Bartz would take his Suzuki to the high banks and battle with other riders. However, Bartz would make contact and crash with 2 other riders, Wayne being thrown 30 feet into the air, and then landing unprotected on the ground. In attendance were both his wife and 2 children, witnessing their father sadly pass chasing speed at Daytona. Talmadge Prince, born February 16, 1938, has quite possibly one of the best names to ever hit the Daytona Speedway. Being from Coleman, Alabama, racing was inherent in his DNA. Business sense seemed to also be there, buying a 50% share in a Chrysler Plymouth dealership in 1969. He's able to do so with another successful business venture from his brother William. Originally, racing was only late models on short tracks of the South. But with his positive trajectory in business, he's able to afford a small entrant into the 1970 Daytona 500. The second wife, Nell, who was pregnant with their first child, and his other 2 children from a previous marriage in attendance as well, Tab Prince would hit the track in his new Dodge Daytona. He would start the second 125-mile qualifying duel and race till lap 18. Prince's engine, though, would let go and dump oil onto his tires. Bill Seifert, racing Prince, also hit the oil, losing control with Tab. He would T-bone Talmadge driver's side first, killing Prince instantly. Nell would go on to have Tab's only son with her 7 months later. His name? Talmadge. Being a 20-year-old college student, Joe Rusty Bradley Jr. took his Kawasaki bike to Daytona as a fun hobby. With both his parents in attendance, he roared around the track until he would lose balance and fall off his bike. He would hit the pavement, knocking him unconscious. He was taken to the Halifax Medical Center, where hours after the incident, with both his mother and father by his side, and not regaining consciousness, he would pass away. 30-year-old David Pearl from Tampa, Florida was one of many to participate in the 1971 Paul Whiteman Trophy race. He would drive a Formula F racer, but lose control on lap 2. He would be slammed into by Mila Vega, driving a Lola T202 Formula Ford. The graduate from Oglethorpe University would be trapped inside the car for 15 minutes before being transported to the hospital, where with his wife there, he would be pronounced dead. Born July 29, 1935, Raymond Lee Hassler would start his professional racing career at the start of the 1960s. Through his rise in the ranks, he would win only the second ever Snowball Derby, and eventually find a ride in the Cup Series for Heims Hanley in 1970. Eventually in 1971, he was given a job to fill in for Charlie Glotzenbach, who fell ill in a race at Bristol, and he would actually bring the car to victory lane, winning unofficially a Cup race. It doesn't count under him in records, but it propelled Hassler into having opportunities for 1972. Running in his qualifying race at Daytona, David Ray Boggs would blow a tire, causing a pileup. Hassler would spin through the infield, not slowing and eventually sliding back on track and slamming the outside wall. After the wall impact, Jimmy Crawford would slam into him passenger side as well before hitting him up against the wall again, and then finally coming to rest. He was declared dead on scene of the accident, leaving behind his wife and children. The family stayed in Hassler's home state of Tennessee, where his son Jay runs a rental equipment business now. He will, on the offhand chance, race at Five Flags Speedway, same place his father decades ago won the Snowball Derby. Gordon Lee Williams Jr., born May 14, 1947, grew up in his humble town of Madison, Florida. While not close to the Daytona Beach area, Don Williams would be drawn to the track that many chase speed dreams at, Being 31 years old, he would enter the 1979 Permatex 300 Sportsman race. Williams would be racing his Chevelle until a large accident would occur. The fireball between Joe Frazion and Del McCowart would have no relation to what happened to Gordon Lee. He would spin avoiding the incident, slamming the wall and being showered in debris. Williams would be placed in the hospital, comatose. After 3 months, he was transferred back to where he was born, in Madison, Florida. Eventually, over the years, Don would come home from the hospital and receive care from his family, still in the unresponsive state. His parents and sister would never give up hope, though, helping through a tough spell of pneumonia, always pushing against the increasing uphill battle. Their efforts gave Don 10 extra years of life, occasionally coming in and out of the state the wreck left him in. But finally, on May 21st, 1989, the battle would come to an end. Being from Paw Paw, Michigan, Benny Richard Knotts wanted to follow the paths of other great Michigan drivers to emerge from the land of the Motor City. He battled throughout the 70s of the Midwest Tour, before finally getting an opportunity at stock car's greatest proving ground. He was hot off his win in the 1979 Redbud 400, along with winning other various ASA races. But in Knott's first ever race in a Cup car, he would lose control during his qualifying race on lap 14. Ricky's Oldsmobile would slide and hit the outside wall in the tri-oval. He rolled off the wall and helplessly rolled across the infield, where he again made contact with the inside wall. The impacts broke his seat, and the young ASA prospect was killed instantly. What becomes peculiar about this crash, though, is what fellow driver Blackie Wangerin stated later on about the incident. The car, apparently to him, just drove straight into the wall in the front stretch, like nobody was at command. NASCAR inspected the car later and found the steering column was broken, but was unsure if that came before or after the impacts with the inside and outside wall. Harold Bruce Jacoby came from the land of open wheel, but found fascination in the racing of the South. Being from Salem, Indiana, Jacoby would start his racing career by hitting the open wheel scene. Eventually, he would profess to running part-time USAC, doing that for over a decade. Eventually, by the time Bruce was 40, he decided stock cars were his avenue as he got older. He ran half the 1975 Cup season. On and off, he would race all the way till 1983, attempting that year's Daytona 500. He took to his qualifying race like he had any other time. With his wife Yada and 3 children in attendance, Bruce would rip around the track in his Pontiac. However, on that gusty day, the winds wreaked havoc and took the control from Bruce's hands. He spun off a turn 2 and darted for the infield. The car overturned, flipping violently, severely injuring Jacoby after the incident was over. He was taken to Halifax, where he fought for his life over the next months. He eventually was taken back home by the end of March, still fighting in a comatose state. His wife Yada took care of him in and out of the house, being a registered nurse. Flipping back and forth between the Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis and a nursing home, Yada never gave up hope for her husband. She was given an award in 1985 for her efforts titled the Women Behind the Scene Award. She fought for another 2 years, until at the age of 51, Bruce would pass on February 4th, 1987, nearly 4 years after the accident. He left behind his wife and children Mark, Alan Rice, and Susan. Born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada, Francis Archibald Aflac was not your normal Daytona competitor. As a hobby, he would race late models, whilst working out of the suburbs of Quebec. Eventually, he took the leap and moved to Charlotte, committing to running in the ARCA series. In 1985, he headed to Daytona to run the ARCA 200. During practice on February 7th, Francis would be streaking around the track at speeds approaching 200 miles an hour. But he'd lose control in turns 1 and 2. He would slide across the banking and take air, flipping 8 times. During the spirals, Affleck would be thrown about, having the window net partially fall down, ejecting him out of the car. It would partially crush him as well, and take his life. It was noted that the failure of the seatbelts and window net was the primary reason for why he was killed, and therefore the tragedy didn't go unnoticed. NASCAR and ARCA completely rethought window net design from that day forward, and they still use ideas from that crash today on how roll cages are designed, making sure nothing like this would ever happen again. Francis left behind his wife of 15 years, Kathleen, and their 2 sons. Many know Christopher Bell as being one of the very few drivers from Oklahoma but many don't know of Charles Allen Ogle, the successful physician and businessman turned race car driver. Being from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, Charles would join the Air Force, quickly ascending to captain status. He would graduate from medical school and set up a trauma clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee. And on the side, he bought over 120 franchises of Wendy's and D-Lights, collecting quite a respectable wealth. In 1984, he decided at the age of 42 to finally splurge and start a casual racing career. Running part-time in the Goodies Dash Series in 1984 and 85, it'd be the year that he committed to running every race. In just his first year, he would finish second 3 times and win at Southside Speedway. In his rookie debut, he was second in overall points, and Ogle again was performing like a professional. He was called later that year to test a Pontiac Sunbird in 1985, in what would be prep for the 1986 season. But during the test, the car would lose a tire at around 160 miles an hour. The car apparently spun and hit the sod surrounding the infield road course, grabbing it and throwing the car over 100 feet into the sky. It eventually came to rest on the dirt embankment in the infield. Ogle severely hurt. For 11 days they fought to save the Air Force captain, but on Boxing Day 1985, Charles Allen Ogle would pass. Being from Richmond, Virginia, Joe Young was always looking for racing. He was a mechanic for a career, and on the side he would race on and off across the 1980s. Daytona would become a familiar place for him, racing in the Dash Series there for years. But in 1987, during the Comfort Coach 200, Young would be involved in a crash through 3 and 4. It was between him and Dual Sturgill, who hit him head on. The impact caused a massive fire, and it severely injured Young. Eventually the burns is what he would succumb to. The 38-year-old would leave behind his wife Dolores and their 2 children, Jody and Lisa. Renton, Washington. Possibly the furthest place from Daytona Beach, Florida, but still a place attracted to the high banks. 25-year-old James Coleman was a part of the Karting World Championship for 1987, taking his Yamaha S-Light class kart to the track. Each kart can reach speeds of 150 miles an hour around the track, attracting over 1,000 racers. At around 10 a.m., Coleman would lose control and hit the guardrail. The crash would have him transported to the Halifax Medical Center, where there he was pronounced dead from his injuries. It would actually be the first ever karting death at the Speedway, putting a sad note on a long week of events at the track for the world karting fans and drivers. James left behind his parents Ed and Aaron, along with brothers Andrew and John, and sisters Jessica, Kathleen, Melissa, and Mary Ann. Being a novice rider, Randall W Glenn took to the 3.56 mile road course of Daytona with cautious optimism. The 38-year-old had his Kawasaki EX500 that he would ride around his home in St. Augustine. While it wasn't his first time there, he'd only 2 years prior of experience racing. Exiting the infield road course that morning, he would lose control and fall off his bike. The impact on the ground would kill him instantly. While he was technically a novice still, the wreck was a surprise even to the series director himself, Roger Edmondson. He was quoted in saying about the accident that, "He was the last guy in the world I thought this would ever happen to. I thought he would be doing this till he was 65 or just got tired of racing." The 1989 Enduro World Karting Championship would return to Daytona yet again, shortly after Christmas in 1989. One of the drivers to participate in the event was 26-year-old Dale Robertson from Sanford. Participating in sit-up karts, Robertson would be involved in a multi-car accident, severely injuring him. Shortly after he was transported, he was pronounced dead, being only the second karting fatality in the Speedway's history. Julius David Johnson III always grew up around racing throughout his life, being from Florence, South Carolina. Dirt tracks were his domain growing up, but he would leave his racing dreams for the military services in the 1960s. He would debut back in Cup though in 1979 at Rockingham, and eventually make it to Daytona in 1982. He would lose to Tim Richmond in a consolation race, and in 1988 during a practice session at Charlotte, Julius David, or what they nicknamed him as Slick Johnson, would crash, and it would severely injure him. He would fight through the recovery process for 1989 and return to racing in 1990 at Daytona. In the ARCA 200 race, Slick Johnson would make it all the way to lap 76, where he would lose control and spin, crashing hard and again severely injuring him. He would be taken to the Halifax ICU for 3 days before passing away, leaving behind his family and friends. Donald Joe Boer, born February 2nd, 1941, was always at home with his family business in West Lafayette, Indiana. Being a graduate from Purdue, he primarily worked with his family farm. However, Joe, on the offhand chance, would be able to go off and race Cup and Goodies Dash races when he could. In 1993, at the age of 51, Boer was again participating in an event at the Speedway, the Florida 200. Heading into turn 1, Boer would make contact with Carl Horton's front left fender, turning him straight into the outside wall head-on. He would then slide back down into the path of Rodney White's car, being hit again, before officially coming to rest. It wasn't even an hour into the race, and by the time he was transported to Halifax, he was pronounced dead. Joe left behind his family business and his wife and 3 children. James Charles Adamo, born March 2nd, 1957, in Glen Clove, New York, was the son of Italian parents from Benevento, Italy. He would start racing motocross at 14, and by 16 he was a professional motocross rider, running in the AMA series and achieving resounding success. But after a knee injury, he would move to paved racing. At 22, he began dominating the scene, and in 1982 and 83 he would win the Battle of the Twins Grand Prix. By the time of 1993, Adamo was a well-experienced and older rider, being 36. Racing in the Daytona 200, he took his Ducati, a brand he'd rode with his entire career, to the 17th row. There, he would lose control in the race and slam the guardrail during the event, being pronounced dead on scene. The motorcycle parts salesman left behind his wife and 2 daughters. Lawrence Neil Bonnet, born July 30th, 1946. Bonnet became one of many racing icons from Hueytown, Alabama. The gang, known as the Alabama Gang, would rise through the 70s and 80s. Neil would collect 18 wins during this time at the Cup level, along with winning the Southern 500, World 600, and Firecracker 400. In 1991, driving for the Wood Brothers, he would get hurt in an accident at Darlington. It would sideline him until 1993, where close friend Dale Earnhardt would give him a ride in a 31 car prepared by Richard Childress Racing at Talladega. There, he would have a horrific crash, but walk away from it unscathed somehow. For 1994, he made a deal to run part-time with the 51 team for James Finch. Neil during this time had started a promising broadcast career, but put that on the back burner to fulfill his competitive desires. The highly respected figure in the garage would go out for practice during speed weeks in 1994, hitting the high banks at Daytona like he did the 20 years prior. However, a shock mount would break, throwing the car sideways onto the apron, where he would correct, and then whipping the car back across track into the wall head-on. The impact would kill him instantly. The legacy of Neil Bonnet pre- and post-death is so huge in the sport that it's hard for me to even sum up in this video. But the point is, he's a legend. And he left behind his wife Susan and children David and Kristen. Rodney Brian Orr, born November 6th, 1962. He would become the second fatality during what was the 1994 Speed Weeks. Orr was the reigning Goodies Dash champion at the time, and after an incredible rallying effort from his hometown, Orr would pass away in 1994 on Valentine's Day. His car would lose control similar to that of Bonnet and turn over roof first into the outside wall. Now, I would go into more detail here about Rodney's incredible story, but earlier this year I actually made a video highlighting Rodney's life, titled Who Was Rodney Orr? So if you want to find out more about him, go watch the video. William Michael Heims, born May 7th, 1954. From Los Gatos, California, he approached the 1997 sports car season like he had any season before. As he sailed around the over 3.5-mile road course, he entered the backstretch chicane, where his Honda Civic would slide and slam a wall head-on. The impact severely hurt Heims, and he was transported to Halifax for further evaluation. It was shortly after that he was pronounced dead. He put an incredible somber note on the next day's events, the Rolex 24. Being a long-time rider, Roger Ryman had won the first ever Daytona 200 all the way back in 1961. The now 58-year-old rider from Kewanee, Illinois, still participated in the events, however, this time being involved in a BMW Battle of the Legends event. However, racing regardless of speed will always be dangerous, and in a chain reaction event, Ryman would crash with at least 4 other riders, throwing him airborne and killing him on impact with the ground. The entire event was subsequently cancelled, and the remaining riders parked his bike in pole position, and later participated in a 3-lap tribute to their fallen icon. Ryman was known as probably one of, if not the best rider in Daytona 200 history. Chad Madison, a 24-year-old motorcycle rider from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. The Daytona bike events would naturally lure him to the Speedway. On Halloween of 1997, practice would begin, with Madison taking his Yamaha 400 out on the track. As he exited the infield road course, he would fall off his bike and crash. Before the event, Madison had only 11 prior starts to the event in 1997, and he got into motorcycle racing through being a mechanic. The crash, however, would kill Chad, leaving behind his mother and father Cynthia and Warren, and his sister Amy. Christopher William Tatro from Leesburg, Florida, was the son of a dentist and assistant principal during Bike Week in 2000. Leesburg native and amateur rider Chris Tatro headed to the Speedway. Coming up on his 23rd birthday, he headed to the event at Daytona looking for some fun on his Kawasaki 600. However, Tatro would wipe out by himself and be killed from the crash instantly. There was no witness on scene being able to know exactly what happened to him, but Tatro's death heavily dimmed the spirits of what was supposed to be a new officiating body in Pace Motorsports. It was their first time running Bike Week. The organization handled the situation quite horribly, refusing to ever comment, leaving all media requests to Daytona to answer all by themselves. Ralph Dale Earnhardt, born April 29, 1951. Over his life, Earnhardt built a legacy that is so extensive I couldn't even approach covering it in a single video, let alone this segment. The Intimidator won 7 Cup Series championships, 76 Cup races, and became the most winningest driver in Daytona Oval history. By 2001, he was building a racing empire with his Dale Earnhardt Incorporated company. But on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, Earnhardt would be turned sideways before clipping the apron in turn 4. It would shoot him back across the track and into the wall head-on, the impact killing him instantly. Today, Earnhardt is as popular as ever, and his impact on the sport is something challenged by few. He left behind his wife Teresa, sons Kerry and Dale Jr., and daughters Kelly and Taylor. Durk Arthur Pease, born April 18, 1955 in Denver, Colorado. He was the son of Robert Pease, a driver on the Bonneville Salt Flats, who set various speed records through the 50s. Eventually his brother Jay, Ron, and Ty followed their dad, all participating in motorcycle racing and other subsects of motorsports as well. Durk started in drag racing, eventually moving to motorcycles, and participating in events with Wyeth Jackson. Jackson was not only a fellow competitor, but his teammate on and off the track. The two were dating at the time of the 2001 Pro Thunder bike race. Rider Kiyo Watanabe would crash in the race. Sitting on track, Durk would approach the scene and panic to avoid the stranded rider. He would hit the bike instead of launching himself into Watanabe, which would kick Pease off his bike and send him into a series of barriers constructed out of hay bales. He would later pass away from his injuries. Wyeth had seen the accident, but was unaware of how serious her partner's injuries actually were. She would come home 13th. The accident ended what was an immaculate racing career spanning over 20 years, featuring cars like the Formula Fords, all the way to the Busch Light cars in NASCAR. Stewart Spencer Stratton came from Spokane, Washington, to California as a kid. He would garner an associate's in marine technology at the Santa Barbara City College, before working on remotely operated vehicles that would search the seafloor. On the side, he became an expert motorcycle rider, and was set to participate in the CCS GTO Expert Race. Many riders were already leaving for the warm-up laps, but some in the back of the field were still getting ready. Stratton practiced his jump on his Yamaha YZF R6, and Virgil Davis, a 71-year-old track official, had already walked out onto the surface where he moved into the same path as Stratton. Stewart hit the official, breaking Davis's leg, and then he went head-on himself into the pit wall on his bike. He'd be transported to the Halifax Medical Center where he was pronounced dead. Stratton left behind his mother Marie and father Bruce. Michael Lawrence Davis Jr., would be one of many riders taking on the World Karting Association race, being only 17 years old. He and his father would consistently race together, with Michael Jr. showing promise, winning the Light Class Series for 2001. With 1 day left in the year, they took on Daytona, whilst Michael Jr. was on winter break from his first semester in college near Cleveland. Davis would make it to the last turn of the event, where a 600cc kart would be bumped from behind, throwing him from it. The incident killed him instantly. On the side, Michael had worked for a non-profit organization and was building an impressive reputation for how young he was. He survived by his mother and father. The 28-year-old Cape Coral local Brian William Eugene Castle Jr. went to Daytona with his Ducati sports bike, hoping to race in the amateur lightweight Grand Prix. His team was called the Mighty Duck Racing Team, a play on words for the Ducati name. The Ducati he was riding would have a problem though during the week, and he would wipe out on the final corner before getting hit by another rider in Jeff Tatum. Both would be transported to Halifax Medical Center, where Castle would be pronounced dead. Tatum would only have minor injuries. Castle survived by his wife Heather and parents Carol and Brian Sr., along with sister Laura. Roy Holland Weaver III, from Andalusia, Alabama, is the only marshal to be killed in Daytona history. Weaver was cleaning up debris when pace car driver Ray Paprada was coming around the track at around 100 miles an hour. He would swerve to avoid the 44-year-old track worker and tailspin into him. The impact would obviously kill him instantly. Whilst this explanation seems brief, this story goes much, much deeper than this. One left for another video. Robert Boswell always loved racing. He would contemplate what it was like to actually race around tracks like Daytona, and on his 60th birthday, his son gave him that answer. A ticket to the Richard Petty driving experience. It was a follow-up to their visit from the past February, when they watched the Daytona 500 together for the first time in person. The Popka native participated in his classes and hit the track. At around 70 miles an hour, the pace car observed Boswell's car swerve and then slap the wall before coming to rest. When safety crews got over to him to see what had happened, they found him unconscious. He was later pronounced dead. It was found that he had actually suffered a heart attack whilst on track, leaving behind his family and friends. Alan Charles Burgess, born January 4th, 1955, began racing as far back as the 1980s. It was never a super serious thing for him, but always something he felt he had to do, stating he, quote, felt incomplete without his racing. The sentiment was felt the harshest when he stopped participating in the 90s, following an accident that occurred. After recovering, he came back in the early 2000s, racing a Porsche 944. He participated in various SCCA events, and he would run in the August 9th, 2009 event with his Porsche in the GT2 class. During the race, entering the bus stop, however, the car caught fire, and it immediately engulfed the entire vehicle. Alan stayed slow though, as the flames grew more and more, trying not to feed the flames even more oxygen by speeding up. He headed to the pit lane to hopefully find marshals. However, the extended time made it difficult for marshals to fight the flames, and in effect trapped Burgess inside the car. Alan would eventually be transported fighting extreme burns across his body. The Halifax Medical Center tried all they could. On the 24th of August, he would pass at 54 from his burns. Outside of racing, Burgess found a career in the Cisco Food Company, along with the Eckerd Drug Company. He enjoyed science fiction and enjoyed spending time with his wife Marlene and stepchildren. For years, Daytona has hosted driving school, teaching people various abilities behind the wheel. With so many sessions, the chances of accident would always seem to be high. However, it never seemed to actually strike, with most schools being accident-free for over 20 years. That streak, though, would come to a sad end on October 17, 2013. Instructor Rick Shaw from Port Orange had taught courses for years. It had become his primary focus since retiring from law enforcement in 2005. Before that even, he had grabbed the record for most laps completed in the Daytona 200 ever. Being a 65-year-old trainer, he was a well-respected and experienced rider. Like any other, he took student Eric Dessy from Quebec onto the track for lessons. Dessy also raced motorcycles back home in Montreal, but never actually taken to a track like Daytona. Coming off of Oval Turn 2 at high speeds, the two would make contact during their lesson, and they both would wipe out. Initially, they would survive and be transported to the hospital, but after that, both would pass. It'd be the first, and thankfully the only incident so far, that has featured multiple fatalities at Daytona. Sadly took two highly respected riders in two very different subsects away from us too soon. During the making of this video, in some horrific, disgusting irony, Daytona had another fatality for the first time in 10 years. The 41st soul claimed at the track. 62-year-old Mark Matthys from Ohio would take to the track like he had many times before this year. Being an experienced driver, Daytona was very familiar to him, and he took to the Auto Club event at Daytona as normal. Matthys during the event though suffered a flat tire and pulled to the inside of the track. Sitting on the flat far off from the exit of the infield course back onto the oval, 24-year-old Marcel Fayen was working down the front stretch. It was at that point that he made contact with another driver, sending him sliding into turn 1. He flew through the median that was in between the entrance and exit to the infield and smashed into Matthys' stranded car, passenger side first. The impact reportedly killed Mark nearly instantly. Marcel Fayen is currently on a very long track to recovery, and hopefully he can make a complete one. Mark's legacy, though, is one that is still growing. Right before Mark had left to go to Daytona, his daughter gave birth to his grandson Xavier. He was able to meet his grandson once and then headed off to Daytona for the track event, being able to receive photos every day from his daughter of his new grandson. After her father's passing, in an interview with the newspaper, she was quoted as saying that her father said that his grandson was perfect, and he just didn't believe it. Mark joined a group of men that all had something in common. They all came to fantasize and realize their own dreams of speed. Whether they were 17 or 65, a 7-time champion, or man wanting to just taste what it's like. The chase is relentless, the speed's unwavering, and the legacy's eternal. For those who paid the ultimate price for their dreams of speed, may they forever rest in peace.